By the way, there's a soup kitchen afterward at 1 o'clock, and so we will fax you a bowl and a roll so that you can join with us and socialize. Let me introduce Tony Piña. Tony is a graduate of BYU. What year, Tony?
Let's put it this way. I was after Carl Mazer.
So Tony,
no, I got my bachelor's in '89 and my master's in '91.
Oh, that's nothing. That's very current. Baby. Yeah. Tony graduated from Brigham Young University and is now working in the private sector. He works for for-profit university, Sullivan University. He's going to tell you about that today, and he's going to talk to you about the phenomenon of for-profit universities and how they work, and why would that be of interest to a group like this? Because you will go out into a world that is increasing in numbers of private universities for profit, and this may well be a place that you would consider working, or at least that you need to know about, because it's going to be a new world. So, Tony, is there anything else I should say before we turn it over to you?
No, I think I can handle my own obituary.
Okay.
As far as who I am, I'm really pleased to be able to do this. It's a wonderful thing for me to be able to address people who are from my program. I am a very grateful alum of BYU. I started my career there, and it's a wonderful place, and it will always be part of me. This is my first time doing something like this using Google Hangouts, and I have noticed that like most applications like this, it tends to handle video better than audio. And so if you have trouble hearing me, please don't hesitate to have me repeat. And I'll also probably ask the same of you, because you all sound like you're talking through a synthesizer to me. And so so I may have to, if you have questions, I may have you repeat them for me. Now I had thought to do a PowerPoint presentation. I uploaded it to ScreenShare. Apparently the search engine in ScreenShare doesn't like brand new files. That's in there. So I do have it. I do have it here, and you know, I can do it with the PowerPoint, or I can do it without. What I'd really like to do is just spend a little bit of time giving you some background of, you know, how I ended up here, and then give the bulk of the time to you to ask questions. And I'll probably prompt you with some of these questions. So let me try seeing how Google Hangouts does with ScreenShare. Okay, so let me see what happens.
The trouble with living on the front.
Now, what do you see?
Is that your
we see your editing window of PowerPoint. So we can see your slide, and we see your slides on the left-hand side of your screen, and the toolbars. We see your mouse moving around too. It's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
This is how it used to
Well,
be.
part of the problem that we found out is when you actually put this in slideshow view, you still see only the editing view.
Yeah.
So if you can see this, I'll start off with this, and then I'll get rid of the PowerPoint presentation, and then we can see each other and talk to each other. So I titled this "Online and For-Profit Education: A View from the Other Side," mainly because that tends to be where I tend to approach this. I have kind of a triple whammy for me, in that I'm a Latter-day Saint, I work in online education, and I work for a private sector for-profit university, which means I'm under a triple microscope. So I tend to have to be an apologist for more than one thing. And those of you who have had to defend the church and defend your beliefs, you know where I'm coming from. I do this for a living with my own sector. So let me tell you a little bit about my personal journey in here. I've been in the field of instructional educational technology, instructional design for 25 years. I began in 1980 at BYU, training pre-cert how to, at the time, the sophisticated multimedia of the day, the instructional technologies of the day, which meant that I taught them how to do such sophisticated things as threading 16mm projectors, how to change bulbs on overhead projectors, how to show books using opaque projectors. But then we went ahead into things like computers and all that. And I got into the field as an instructional designer and as a teacher, teaching in both K-12 and higher ed. And while I was at BYU, I taught both what is now IP&T 286, the Introduction to Educational Technology, and then also a 515R graduate seminar in educational technology. Once I left BYU, I spent 7 years as coordinator of educational technology and full-time faculty at a community college in California, and then started teaching in the grad ed tech program at California State University San Bernardino. And I've been at the university level for about 18 years as a faculty and administrator. Also spent a few years in Chicago at Northeastern Illinois University where I was on faculty and also coordinator of learning technologies. And for the past 4 years have been at Sullivan University, where I'm dean of the online campus of the university. During that time, I've also been a consultant in instructional design and instructional technology for Fortune 500 companies, for large and small businesses, for government agencies, and for the U.S. military. As part of the rest of my obituary is, from a scholarly standpoint, I have 35 publications, most of those peer-reviewed, journal articles, book chapters, and one book. I'm working on my second for AECT. I've done 150 conference presentations, 200 workshops. For AECT, I'm a recent past president of the Division of Distance Learning for AECT, and most recently, I spent 3 years on the AECT Board of Directors. I'm also on the editorial board of the Quarterly Review of Education and the Journal of Management. Now, about for-profit education. Well, for-profit education is known under a few different names. Some of them more complimentary than others. Most people in the sector like to call themselves private sector education or proprietary education. This is not new. For-profit education is not new. It's been around since ancient Greek time, where they had Greek tutors that sold their services to students, and we've had for-profit private schools in the U.S. since the late 1800s. Quite a bit in the early to mid 20th century, with the rise of public education, where we started doing land privileges and diverting a lot of tax monies to establishing state universities. But there's been a sharp rise since the mid-70s, and particularly since the mid-90s, when the internet has played such a big role. So let me tell you a little bit about why I was attracted to this particular university, and we can talk more about that in the future. And then I'll give you some topics that we can chew on. Really, for me, I had spent many years, 21 years, in nonprofit higher ed, primarily at state colleges and universities. And I love the places where I worked. I worked with great people, with great students. But one of the things that frustrated me was how long it took programs to be developed. When I was at Cal State, I proposed some changes for our master's degree in educational technology, and they were fairly fundamental, but it was really rewriting most of the courses. It really wasn't creating even new courses. And they said, Tony, this is great. It'll take us 7 years to implement this. And I thought, no, that can't be. But they were right. It took exactly 7 years for those changes to be made. And so slow program development was a constant frustration. Lack of entrepreneurship. At my last state university, they really had the feeling that there were only 2 sources of money. Student tuition and then the state and federal government allotments, occasional grants and things like that. And so I would tell people, why don't we go out and do instructional design projects for the military and for large businesses? They're hungry for this. And people would look at me like I was speaking, a different language to them. And I served my mission in southern Chile, and I speak Spanish. But I swear to you, I was speaking English to them. But I was speaking a language that they didn't understand. The decision-making process was very frustrating for me, because anytime we had good ideas, it had to go through this collective bargaining unit and this union and these groups and all of that. And it took months and months and months and sometimes years to make decisions that should have been made in just a matter of a couple of weeks. In more meetings than I wish to remember, whenever we talked about things and what we were going to do at the college or university, it was, how does it affect this group? How does it affect, this bargaining unit? How does it affect administration? How does it affect faculty? And unfortunately, very, very little on what's best for the students. In public education, there is no business sense. The funding models are really strange. And for anyone who is in private sector, it's very difficult to make heads and tails out of it. I understand it, and it's not very pretty, it's not very efficient, and unfortunately, it promotes waste. And I know, because I used to get calls as the head of educational technology, I used to get calls from all over campus saying, we have to spend this money by the end of the fiscal year, or else we're going to lose it. What technology can I buy? And so I recommended hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of technology that got put into closets. And so I found an institution, and I kind of found it by accident. I was actually looking for instructional design projects to introduce at my university. And I got this ad for Dean of Online Studies for Sullivan University. And I thought, Sullivan? Never heard about it. And so I went to research. And the more I researched the history and the people involved with this, that program development happened very quickly, that they were entrepreneurs, and you can make decisions without having to go through several layers. That the students, and I know this sounds like a cliche, but the students were their customers. There was business sense, and they were open to the types of innovation and change that I would be recommending at my institutions. And so, for the remainder of this, I kind of like to just kind of discuss and answer questions, and here's some possible things that we can focus upon. Is one, the idea that for-profit universities are all alike. Everybody's just like University of Phoenix, for instance. That it's all about profit, not about education. We really don't care about the students. All we care about is how fat the portfolios of the shareholders are. That public education is cheaper than private sector education. That for-profit universities saddle students with exorbitantly high tuition and high debt to match. That for-profit students typically let in students who are unqualified for college-level work. That there is a high attrition and high dropout rate in for-profits, and especially for online programs. And that ultimately, students going to a for-profit university are going to get a worthless degree. So these are some things that we can discuss, some things that I can clarify, or if you have other questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. I've got more PowerPoint slides with charts and graphs and all that sort of stuff that I can either show you, or probably even better, just send to Dr. Rich and Dr. Vivens, and they can distribute to those who are interested. But what I'd rather do is to discuss and answer your questions or concerns. Your turn. Oh, and by the way, I have to tell you, you can't intimidate me. My current calling in the church is early morning seminary.
I think Kyle had one back there.
So you're seeing way too many people awake, is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
See if I can get the Kyle's backwards. Alright.
So you mentioned that a lot of people only see two basic ways to get profit through student tuition or government grants and things like that. Were there alternative ways to gain profit for profit education?
Oh, well, absolutely. You see, that's what happened when I was at my state universities. I was at Northeastern Illinois University in Chicago. I was teaching there. I was the coordinator of learning technologies. It's a traditional state university. It would probably be similar to say Utah State, well, or Southern Utah University or something there in Utah, or Cal State. But for them, there was a very simple formula for college funding. State allotment goes down, tuition goes up, and that was it. There was no real other source of income. It was either the state allotment from the state of Illinois, and then occasional federal funding that we get in for that. But mostly it was paid for by the states. I mean, millions of dollars from the state for general operating fund. And whatever the state didn't pay, tuition had to pay. And I said, no, you don't have to do it that way. We can bring in all other kinds of funds, and we can give consulting gigs to our faculty. I mean, that's the way it happened to me. I would go out and people would say, oh, I need this, web-based instruction, or I need somebody to build websites, or I need somebody to create this instruction and training and stuff like that. And at my institution, former institution, they would do all of the yucky paperwork and all the stuff that I didn't want to do, and I would just do the creation, and we'd split the money, and it would be income for the institution. But I talk about this at the state university, and it was like, how many of you have seen the movie A Christmas Story with the Red Ryder BB gun? Yeah. It's like, they looked at me like I had lobsters growing out of my head. This line from this movie, and that's what it was like. And so then when I came to Sullivan and I said, let's do these things, they were all, yeah, why not? And so because they got no money from the state, and so all of the money comes from either tuition or other ways in which we can generate funds and investments and things like that, just like a business.
You mentioned that the first one on your list was like all online universities are like. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit more, like University of Phoenix, College Shape?
Sure. You have online universities, and then you have for-profit universities, and basically, a for-profit university is a business. It is started by a person or maybe some investors. Like, for instance, if any of you are going to start a business, you can either fund it yourself, or you can get some investors or venture capitalists or whatever to plug money into your business to start up, and as a result, they get a certain net from the profits, and you get a certain net from the profits. And so this is just basically applying that kind of business model to education. Now, where the online comes in is that one of the biggest, probably the biggest misconception about for-profit education is that all of the institutions are alike. Well, there are over 3,000 different private sector schools, and you've all seen a lot of them. If you drive by a strip mall and you see, Tiffany's Beauty College, that's a private sector for-profit school, started by Tiffany or Tiffany's family or whomever. And then some of these are actually obtained by large corporations or by large venture capital corporations. And so you have, large publicly traded corporations like Apollo that owns University of Phoenix, or Career Education Corporation that owns Argosy, or Capella Education that owns Capella University. These are really large companies, and the university is part of this large company. And it's sort of like the church has Bonneville Communications, and it has other entities within it. The difference is the church operates under a nonprofit model, and these other companies operate under a profit model. And so the for-profits were really the first ones to really latch on and embrace fully online degrees. Now, fully online programs and degrees have been around as long as the internet has been around. And when I was at BYU, we were actually teaching some of our courses in that kind of a model. We called it independent study, but it was really we were taking print-based stuff and putting it online. And the main difference is, and the reason why for-profits latched on to online degrees more quickly, is that online degrees tended to be very unpopular with the faculty. And at the universities where I worked, and at most universities, the faculty make the bulk of the curricular decisions, and especially at institutions that are unionized, that have promotion and tenure, things don't happen without the faculty's involvement, and usually without the faculty's blessing. Now, the interesting thing about online education is, by and large, at colleges and universities, it starts with the faculty. And so you have individual faculty members who say, I want to put my course online, and they do. And then it starts growing and growing and growing, and at some point, some administrator like me says, hey, we're offering a whole bunch of online courses. We've got to start doing rules and regulations and policies and procedures and doing programs. But there is a lot of skepticism, and still is, about the value of fully online degree programs. And so at a lot of colleges and universities, that skepticism has caused a delay in the adoption of online programs and online degrees. And so since at for-profit universities, the faculty typically aren't unionized, typically are not tenured. And it tends to be more of a top-down hierarchy. Then they basically implemented online degree programs and started doing them first and larger. But now with almost 1/3 of all college and university students taking an online course, and hundreds of them, thousands and thousands of them, getting their full degrees online. And every year the acceptance of online keeps rising, and every year more and more faculty who have master's degrees go back and get their degrees online while they're still working, and finish their doctorates and get their tenure and get their promotion. And so really it's just a matter of the rest of higher ed catching up to the for-profits in that instance.
So Tony, one of the questions about all this, you talked about how there's like 3,000 of these and they're not all the same, and I think that's one of the challenges too, is this idea of how do you discern the quality ones from the less quality ones. And I know for the faculty, this is a question we have when we receive applications, and even for the students, a lot of them will probably go out and become employers of some sort, and they're going to have to make decisions on someone's credentialing and ability. what kind of guidance would you give in terms of how to discern the quality of various different online programs?
Well, that is a beautiful question. And for one, that's part of what I do is I sign the application packets of students coming into at least our online program. My university has three brick and mortar face-to-face campuses and one online campus, and I'm the dean over that. Establishing quality in higher ed is always a really funny, for me it's a funny thing. So before I answer the question, let me tell you a little story. I think you'll appreciate this. When I was first hired at Northeastern Illinois University, and this was in 2004, I was brought in as coordinator of learning technologies, but really what they wanted me to do was to establish the online program at the university. And so I remember sitting in the dining hall with this table surrounded by a whole bunch of faculty who are very obviously not in favor of online programs. Which, you know, I'm a Latter-day Saint. I love stuff like that. I love it when I'm sitting around a table of Baptists. You know, that's my thing. And so when they said, well, how is it that you're going to be able to establish that the online courses will have similarity to our face-to-face courses? And I said, oh, that's a wonderful question, and the answer is so easy. We'll just take the measures that we use to measure quality in our face-to-face courses, and we'll apply those with a little bit of modification to online. So tell me, how do you measure quality in your face-to-face courses? I mean, other than the student surveys. And those of you who are faculty, I think I'm getting some laughing there.
No, Tony, we're totally
Because all of a sudden, well, you all, yeah, well, you're instructional designers, you know all about assessment. But it was so funny to see all of these faces turn pale. And it's like, it's all different depending on the different departments and the different disciplines and blah, blah. And what they were saying is they didn't have any measures of quality for face-to-face. It was given that if there's a professor in there with a doctorate degree, the course is going to be good. But they wanted a different standard for online. Now, when we take it to schools. Do we have some standards that we agree upon? Because, you know, when I get applications, some of these schools I've never heard of, and some of these and you know, not for-profit schools that I've never heard of, because there's 4,000 not-for-profit schools just in the U.S. And so, how do you gauge quality? It's an important question for me because one of my areas just happens to be diploma mills. So I have a big long list of institutions and high schools, by the way, that are diploma mills. So I kept that first. But really, as far as we can gauge, the best single tool that we have at this time is regional accreditation. And you may or may not know that in most countries, accreditation and authorization of schools is done by the government. Here in the United States, the U.S. is split up into 6 geographical areas. Each one is contracted with by the government to a private entity, interestingly enough, that accredits the schools. And for the 11 universities in the South, it's Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. For BYU, it's the Northwest Association. Out in California, it's WASC, the Western Association. For the middle of the country, it's North Central. And that basically, as far as quality goes, does it give us a complete sense of of each academic program? No, it doesn't. So another thing that you can look at is programmatic accreditation. So for instance, it's a business school. Is it accredited by AACSB or ACBSP or IACBE, one of the 3 specialized accrediting bodies? If it's a psychology program, is it recognized by the APA? But even then, that can be difficult because, for instance, I'll just choose a university at random. Utah State University. Utah State University. If you look at different guides and things like that, Utah State University is sometimes considered a 2nd or even a 3rd tier university, but not in the field of instructional technology. In instructional technology, it's one of the top programs in the country. And so how do you gauge quality from these degrees? Well, the way that you gauge quality is by criterion referenced learning outcomes. Now, how many academic programs rely on criterion referenced learning outcomes? Not very many. Probably the closest that we have may be Western Governors University, also there in Utah. But as far as what shows up on a student's transcript when it goes from university to another, it's really difficult. And so again, the best tool that we have is it accredited by one of the 6 regional accrediting agencies? And then, because that's another difference within for-profit schools, you have regionally accredited doctoral granting universities, you have nationally accredited technical and medical assistant colleges, and you have non-accredited cosmetology schools, or you have accredited cosmetology schools, not regional. And that's the other thing is our accrediting way of doing things in higher ed is really confusing, because you would think that national accreditation is a higher level than regional accreditation. And regional accreditation is the gold standard. And is regional accreditation a catch-all for all programs? No, it isn't. So what are other things that you can look at? Secondary accreditation. What does the school? Does it produce graduates who are in positions of authority, or who are in industry, who are in academia? Is research being done? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I'll go to conferences and I'll see certain colleges and universities there that I can count on. I can usually count on somebody from Walden. I can usually count on someone from the American Public University system there, but I don't see a whole lot of people from some of the other larger for-profits.
Hey, Tony, I've got a quick question for you. You mentioned instruction at most public universities is largely, or curriculum is largely directed by the instructors of the course. How is it at Sullivan? Who determines the instruction and how it comes together in the curriculum?
Well, at our university, the faculty does. For instance, one of the biggest differences, as far as that is concerned, is the faculty determine the curriculum of the courses. And for instance, let me give you an example for online courses, because I oversee that. I have instructional designers who work for me, and I oversee the development of online courses. And what happens is we have our discipline leader, our faculty leader, who appoints a subject matter expert among the faculty, or sometimes they'll actually have an outside expert that is endorsed by the academic department, who comes in, and that person's job is to create the create or select the content for the course. And then I team that person up with one of my instructional designers whose job it is to make sure the instruction that is created is instructionally sound and follows sound principles of instructional design. Things like we don't let them give us objectives that are students will be able to gain an appreciation of the aesthetics of fluff. No, we have to have measurable objectives that are aligned with the assessments that are in the course. Where do those come from? The faculty. But the QA is the ID because most faculty members who are subject matter experts don't necessarily know how to design good instruction. That's why instructional designers have jobs, because they take the content knowledge and create the instruction out of it. And that's how it works there. But the content comes from the faculty. When there's going to be a new program that's developed, it's not really based on what, Professor so-and-so did for his dissertation. We actually do this is one difference, is we actually do a very strong market analysis for any upcoming degree programs. But the market analysis, the germ of that program saying we have a need for this comes from the faculty. And so that's not true at all institutions. There are any institution, the things that attracted me to Sullivan is Sullivan operates more like a traditional university. It's not a large publicly traded corporation. There are 6 people in our corporate office. One of them's name is Sullivan, and it's basically like a family business. And so, but as far as those decisions that are made, what is taught in the classroom does not come from our corporate office. However, at other institutions it does. It says we're going to offer degrees in this. They have a design team of instructional designers and subject matter experts brought in by the corporation. And then the courses are created and they're basically delivered to primarily part-time adjunct faculty to teach as they were delivered. Sullivan's more hybrid as far as that goes. We have full-time faculty and we have part-time faculty that teach both face-to-face and online. So at our institution, it goes through the curriculum committee and it goes through both faculty and administration.
Tony, I have a question for you. It has to do with, recently we had Clayton Christensen here on campus talking to us, and he was talking about how the small organizations in an industry tend to nibble at the bottom of the business of the larger organizations and slowly eat up the business of the organizations. And he used steel mills as an example for that. How do you see this happening in education? Are the for-profit organizations going to nibble at the business of the large institutions until they eat up the business? What's the future? And what is the quality trajectory that you guys find yourselves on to improve your product over time?
That's the type of question that I love, because it goes right to the heart of why I do what I do. And I'm a big fan of Clay Christensen. He was here just a couple of months ago, so we had a nice visit as well. A wonderful man, a foot taller than I am. The idea behind that, and he uses interestingly enough Geneva Steel, our beloved steel mill in Provo and Orem, as an example. And the idea behind this, from a basic standpoint, is that you had these large steel mills, and then you had these small mills. And what they did is they started off, they didn't have as much capacity, they didn't have as much money, resources as the large mill. And so what they did is they started making the cheapest type of steel, the rebar steel that goes into concrete. And that was also the least profit margin for the large steel mills. So the large steel mills said, hey, you handle that. We'll be able to not have to worry about that business, and we will concentrate on more profitable business. And then what happened, to make a long story short, these small mills, as they started getting more capacity, started taking the next echelon and the next echelon, until finally they were at the capacity to compete head-to-head with the large steel mills, and they ended up winning because the large steel mills now were so large and bulky that it cost them too much money to create the same thing, and the other ones were able to undercut them and do it at the same level of quality. Well, from education, the idea that Clay Christensen and Henry Eyring has, the son of President Eyring, that in education we have these large education entities, and the large education entities are large and not very efficient, and they've been doing the same thing the same way for a long time. And so what happens is you have these smaller entities that offer, online courses, and the people at the larger entities will say, yeah, but they're lower quality than what we do. And they said, but that's fine because they are handling the education of a sector that we don't educate, we reject. We're selective in universities, so we don't take the lower end. We don't take the first generation students. We don't take the students who are in the lower part of their courses. We take the higher end students. And so you have community colleges and you have for-profit universities that take the lower income, the higher minority students. And people say, well, online learning is not as good as face-to-face. And, then what happens is online learning stops trying to mimic face-to-face. It stops trying to put the face-to-face course online and doing a second-class job of it. It starts now doing things that we can't do face-to-face and extending the classroom and having the students actually spending more time on their education and having better learning outcomes than students in traditional institutions. And as that happens, these online programs are starting to attract more and more people. And so they're not just getting the low-income minority first-generation students. They're getting professors going back to finish their doctorates or getting a postdoctorate master's. They're having corporate executives. That's what I'm seeing in my graduate program. In our doctoral program, it's all corporate executives coming back to get their degrees because they don't have to quit their jobs because the traditional universities are not meeting their needs. Because the structure where you basically put your career on hold for a period of time while you attend face-to-face classes for 3, 4, 5, 6 years works for many people and is not working for a larger section of the population. Now the problem is that an institution like BYU is in pretty good footing because BYU relies on the tithes and offerings of very generous members of the church who subsidize my BYU education by giving me and you the best value deal in higher education. BYU, Provo, Hawaii, and Idaho can't be touched as far as the value that you get for tuition. But when you get to a state university that relies on 70% of its operating funds, 50 to 70% based on taxes, and that tax revenue goes down because fewer people are working, they only have one option, and that is what they're doing, raising tuition by 25% and pricing themselves out of their own market. And so what Clay Christensen said is that For all but the wealthiest universities that can continue to function the way they are, most universities are on an unsustainable economic path. And you can't expect the government to pay for all of this anymore unless there is more money. And, you know, I'm not getting into, you know, political Romney versus Obama, but, and I could, but I'm not going to. The idea from Clay Christensen is that institutions, both for-profit and non-profit, that can operate leaner and meaner, that can course correct, that can offer programs quicker, that meet market needs, that can decide to stop programs that are no longer working. Those are the ones that are going to get bigger and bigger, and eventually will threaten the larger institutions. It will be the smaller state universities that will fall first, because they're on an unsustainable path. So they're going to have to shed programs that they only do mediocre and focus on programs that they only do well, that people will choose them over other institutions. And so this idea of disruptive innovation, online does it because online can meet an ever-growing population. And even the Cal States even the University of California and some of these others are starting to get the message that they better start embracing this online, or else they're going to see a significant chunk go away. And the for-profits, by virtue of their market-centered model, rather than what is it that this union wants, or that our faculty wants, or nutrition wants, when you start making decisions based on what your customer wants, then you tend to grow. If you start making decisions based on what you want, you tend to shrink. And until recently, higher ed has been immune to this. But now, how many articles are we seeing? People questioning the value of higher ed and high tuition and all of that. This is not future, this is present.
Tony, we're going to ask one more question, and we're going to have to go.
Sure, fire away.
Yeah, I was going to ask one about Christensen's statements as well. He's talked about secondary education, but he says 80% of learning there will be online by 2024. I realize that's in a sector other than the one you work in, but what would be your take on that prediction? 80% of learning will be online in secondary ed by 2024.
Well, I think it's conservative. I think that's a conservative estimate. And the reason that I say that is because we already have 4 states that require an online course, that requires students take an online course to graduate from high school. The largest growing sector of online education, community colleges, and secondary ed. BYU has one of the best and largest online high school programs in the country. And there are a lot of people who are looking at that. And as BYU transitions this whole independent study to online, which it will, which it has, yes. You see, for us, this is something that was added to us late in life. We used computers as tools. We didn't use computers as daily communication. We didn't use computers as daily sources of information. We're still skeptical about it. And the current generation of teachers and administrators still is. The rising generation of students, this is not an add-on world to them. Now, if they say 80% of all education is online, I'd say probably that's true. Whether that's fully online or whether it's hybrid, I'd say it would be conservative to say that 80% will be hybrid. I think that more. I think that virtually almost everything that we teach face-to-face, we can teach within a hybrid model. And that will become the model of the future. It's the model of the present. So we're not going to see any decrease in the number of fully online courses. What we're going to see is a decrease in the number of fully face-to-face courses and heading more to hybrid.
Wow, well, thank you.
Tony, our students have to get on to soup and to other classes right now. This has been a really excellent presentation. Your answers have been thorough, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. So thank you.
Well, thank you all. I wish I had a 2-hour fireside because there's so much more to talk about. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and take advantage of your wonderful BYU education. There is nothing that tops faithful scholarship.
Thanks, Tony. See you.